My name is Devin Pena. I'm part of the Art 112 Ancient to Medieval Art History class. I'm going to be discussing today the Temple of Apollo and the significance it plays within Greece, as well as the art and the architecture throughout the world as well.
I feel that the proper way to start this entire informative talk that I'm about to have is starting with information about Apollo, whom the actual temple is built for. Now, Apollo is one of the gods of Greek mythology. He's the god of a bunch of things, including archery, poetry, music, art, oracles, plague, medicine, sun, light, and knowledge. It's kind of funny, but plague and medicine, those are kind of opposing things. But anyways, I'll get back to the point. Now, the entire story of this oracle and the temple is that the land was guarded by a evil serpent who was named as Pythia or Pythia. Now, this serpent was the former ruler of the land, but of course, as ancient times require, Apollo needed to kill the serpent in order to get the land, and after that is when the oracle and the temple was built in his name. Now, this oracle dates back to the Neolithic era, which is roughly 4000 BC, so it's very old. There's a lot of history to it. To understand the reasoning behind Apollo having his own temple in Greece, you need to comprehend that Greek mythology, till this day, it is still studied, but it is not as widely accepted as it once was within Greece in the past. Now, in the past, what they believed is that there were multiple gods, many gods, who each governed parts of the earth. Now, they were divided into gods of heaven, earth, and sea, and these gods were seen as all-powerful and all-knowing. All-knowing could be seen as an example of Apollo, who had his oracle in Delphi and was able to tell people their future. Bit of a side note, but as I said, these gods that the Greek people believed in, well, they're gods, so they wanted them to have these amazing physical appearances. So more often than not, when we look at Greek art and we look at sculptures, we see these perfect builds that are perfectly symmetrical when we look at the shapes of their bodies. They're well balanced, and essentially they are built to look like gods. One of the interesting pieces of literature that I got to read was a book by the name of Delphi, A History of the Center of the Ancient World by the author Michael Scott. Not the Dunder Mifflin paper manager, but the actual author. Now, one of the points that he made that was quite moving in my opinion was the fact that he said a lot of literature needs to be somewhat reviewed or taken with a grain of salt due to the fact that they make Delphi out to be what it was constructed to be rather than what it was constructed as. And he also says that a lot of the objects from Delphi were actually dedications or offerings from individuals or cities or even kings. And they were pretty much varieties of things that were made of gold, bronze, iron, and many other objects. As we start to get a little bit more into the building of the temple, it's actually pretty crazy because one of the things that I read is the fact that allegedly the first temple of Delphi was made of laurel branches, the second one was made of beeswax and feathers, third one of bronze, fourth one was made in stone. Now, as we can see in photos, now it is all broke down, but it's still pretty crazy considering the fact that it kept getting rebuilt. Although all we see is ruins today, there are many depictions within paintings that we can see how it is that it was structured. But to this day, all there is that we can see at the actual site is the foundations. Now, the temple it was destroyed in 373 BC by an earthquake, and it was rebuilt in 330 BC. Sphinxaros, Xenodoros, and Agathon were the architects who worked on this temple, and the sculptures that were within the temple were made by Athenians by the name of Praxius and Androthenes. My apologies if I'm butchering the names, but it was built similar to previous versions of the temple, and essentially they just kept rebuilding it and trying to make it a little bit more sturdy. The ruins that we see today, which, as I said, is the foundations, is actually made from porous stone and limestone, which can also be part of the reason that we still have access to the ruins, considering how strong limestone is, and essentially it shows that they made a good choice within building the building out of limestone. Because even through all the years and all the damage that it had sustained, we still have the foundation to show us the ruins of the temple. The temple was the main part of the entire sanctuary. The temple is where the statues were held, as well as religious ceremonies and rituals were held. To this day, only statues of Athena, a fallen giant, and a man with 2 horses are visible for us to see. The Temple of Apollo was a Doric peristyle temple with 6 columns at the front and 15 on each side. Now, one of the most common features that we see within Greek architecture is columns. Columns add a sense of uniformity and also symmetry to each building that they are placed on, including this one. And essentially what a peristyle is a porch that is supported by all of the columns in the front and the side, which, as I said, is very common within Greek architecture. This entire temple was actually built out of stone, but it was covered in marble. According to some of the research that I did, one of the main components within Greek architecture is just the look of things. Of course, proportions are a huge deal within building in terms of structural stability and also the aesthetic of it, but proportions somewhat varied within buildings of Greek architecture. A lot of architects were similar to sculptors due to the fact that they wanted their buildings to look beautiful from all angles. So a lot of the times, these buildings were built very much based on the appearance, and for that reason, we had these grand, beautiful buildings and grand temples. Overall, even though all that's left of this temple is merely ruins, based off of the former depictions that we have within paintings and even just the ruins themselves, it's easy to see the influence of actual Greek architecture within this temple. And as I said, even though they went based off of the looks of things and it led to them having very beautiful buildings, one of the sources that I got a chance to read was actually pretty amazing due to the fact that rather than an art history book, it was more based off of architectural history. Rather than it being a book about the history of Delphi, the Oracle of Apollo, the Temple of Apollo, or any of that, it was more based off of architectural history and the way that architects actually built these buildings and use mathematical calculations in their buildings. And it's actually quite crazy the amount of formulas that went into simple things such as creating a good diameter for these columns or pillars that were being built in order to keep more of a uniform form to the actual building, to make it look more symmetrical and to make it look more well balanced, so you don't have these huge columns for such a small building. And it's actually quite crazy to see the amount of detail that they were paying attention, considering the lack of accurate tools that they had at the time. To summarize this whole project, I think I started discovering the fact that I like buildings and ruins more than anything, due to the fact that even within my own travels, I started realizing the reason that I like these ruins of ancient buildings is the stories that they have to tell. And it's just quite amazing to me, all the history that has taken place in many of these places.